The New World had fallen into ruin. Its civilization had mostly collapsed, and the three men who had aspired to become true kings, to link the fire, were tainted by the dark and felled by it. However, a new wave of migrants would reach the continent. Vendrick, whose name means powerful revolutionary, the warrior who led the expedition alongside his younger brother Aldia, a scholar, was a man who had conquered the four lords of Lordran and completed his journey as the chosen undead. He'd made the choice to become the Dark Lord in the hopes of finding a more effective solution to the curse of undead, worried that simply linking the fire would not be enough. He was instructed by Gwyndolin through the primordial serpents, who had become his advisors, to use his vast power to create an empire, in a distant land where more great souls resided. Then, he would inherit their strength and become even greater, which would enable him to become a true king unlike any other. Vendrick's journey would lead him to the Dragon Shrine, where he would find the worms. His brother Aldia had claimed the manor, which used to be Havel's castle, and built a cage at its end, which was designed to attract the drakes from the Eyrie, and trap them, so that the knight who follows the brothers could tame them. Thus, the Order of the Dragon Riders was created. The shield of Vendrick's Dragon Riders is modeled after Kaita's tears. Vendrick's journey would lead him to the castle, which used to belong to the king and queen of the New World. Upon conquering it, he declared the name of his all-encompassing empire, which would become both the name of his kingdom to the north and of the New World itself, Drangleic, the Kingdom of Dragons. Drangleic is symbolic of this middle step of the Firelink conspiracy. The dragons were not only being reborn, at this time as worms, an intermediary form, but were also tamed by men and not hunted down. Gwyn's will was being supplanted by Velka's. Justice was gradually being served on a macrocosmic level. Amidst his travels, the king would meet Llewellyn, a blacksmith who knew how to forge equipment from Gaistil, the secret ally, and hire him as the castle's resident master-smith. The man would only supply his work to a select few, but Vendrick would earn his loyalty and admiration for his noble character. His work is easily identified by its lack of ostentation, as Llewellyn focused on an economy of simplicity and strength, which is also emblematic of the king's mentality. Vendrick's soldiers carried a metallic leaf on their chests, a symbol of the Way of Blue, and their armors are symbolic of firelinking. Their helmets are silver, depicting the waning of the sun, and the rise of the moon, with its light being transferred to the underworld, passing through their chests as red and through their skirts as white and yellow. The soldiers of Drangleic parallel the paladins of the Way of White as their inversions. They are paladins of the Way of Blue. Those of White wish to call upon a new dawn, ending the endless night, and those of Blue wish to call upon a new night, ending the stagnant, curse-filled day. The brothers would combine their efforts to create a masterpiece, the Looking Glass Knight, an automaton that represents both the Ribis and the undead. It would be positioned at the castle's end, as the place that would be called the King's Corridor. The design of the Looking Glass Knight is particularly interesting. Its white armor denotes purity, and he wears a crown of thorns on his head, a direct reference to Jesus Christ, who the chosen undead is a metaphor of. As previously established, firelinking is analogous to Christianity. The multiple faces adorning his armor are indicative of the collective of undead who journey to link the fire, and the tears they shed are a reference to Velka, or rather, Kaita, the goddess of tears, as she is mostly known for in the New World. His lightning-imbued sword stands for the masculine, while his mirror shield stands for the feminine. From it, the golem can summon the spirits of undead from other worlds to aid in his task, like a maiden would call for a knight's help and protection, or like a journeying undead would call for spirits of other worlds for aid. The sword was the work of Vendrick, while the shield was Aldia's, as confirmed by the presence of dimension-warping dark mirrors in his manse. The two pairs of angelic wings represent both the wings of the archdragons, as well as the sanctified nature of the duty of firelinking undead, who, through self-sacrifice, reach the heavens. And adorning his chestplate is a golden crest of Drangleic, which was inherited from the dual empire of Havel and Alephis. As previously explained, it depicts the two primordial serpents transformed into dragons, and firelinking by the sword which pierces a flower, a symbol of the sun. The golem would impose a trial upon the undead who wished to serve the king of Drangleic as his royal knights. Those who passed the trial would ascend meritocratically to that rank, for Vendrick was a fair ruler who valued a man's valor above all. The King's Corridor was filled with animated statues crafted by Vendrick, which depicts idealized warriors of Hugo, which he learned of from stories of natives of the New World. Relentless knight with a horse's head, which was Hugo's crest animal, though, in legend, they were fused together with the warriors themselves, and brandishing twin blades, agile weapons that enables them to never cease their attack. Drangleic would incorporate the mythologized story of the New World into its own identity. The legacy of various fallen nations, such as Faroza, Hugo, Ven, and Alken, would be an integral part of the Continental Empire. Many brave warriors would face the trial of the King's Corridor, but only a select few would succeed. Most notably were two victors, Velstad, who became the King's Aegis, and Raimi, who became the King's Sword. Vendrick's forces would explore the entirety of the continent, even finding the three alienated kingdoms which belongs to the three kings who failed to link the fire. He'd build a shrine to each of them to link them to the empire he was gradually establishing, the design of the shrines being emblematic of the ruin of his predecessors. Three beheaded snakes, which symbolize the greedy, covetous kings, encircling a lord vessel-like structure, which bore a tiny, gentle light within, which represented the fading first flame they failed to link. While the older brother was busy conquering the lands, Aldia would incessantly study the curse of undead with the information he could gather from the New World. He would call the curse the first sin upon learning of its origin by the hand of the Lord of Light, Gwyn. This title is very relevant, as it too is related to the religious themes of Dark Souls. It alludes to the temptation and sin of Adam and Eve, which doomed humanity. Aldia would invite scholars of all lands to his keep, not discriminating against warlocks and hexers, for he'd go to any lengths necessary if it meant he could solve the curse. He would create chimeric beings in hopes of transcending the curse, but it resulted in one failure after the other. Among the spoiled fruits of his research are three half-man, half-dragon creatures, the kobolds, who have been created through basilisk DNA, and so their bites can inflict curse, the cyclopic ogres, who have a tough exterior, though one that pales in comparison to the stone scales of the dragons, and the undead aberrations, whose bone structure is terribly malformed. Aldia would not only experiment on his fellow man, he'd even use his research partners as test subjects, which is why some of the monsters of the Mans drop the equipment of Aldia's subordinates upon death. As said before, Vendrick inherited the crest which belongs to the First Empire of Heidi, the original name of the continent. In accordance with that, he would also inherit the immaculate, uncorrupted, original will of his predecessors and prepare to become the truest of kings. He was set to link the fire. That was until a priestess appeared before him with a prophecy. She claimed he should delay the linking of the fire and prepare for war against a foreign threat, an army of giants that would bring calamity to his land and invalidate his legacy otherwise, ruining the prospects of others following in his footsteps to become true kings after him. Despite both Vendrick and Aldia being wary of priests, for they were instructed by the serpents of their often dark intentions, the king heeded her words, for his heart had been stolen by that woman, and as such, he was blinded to reason. Her name was Nashandra, which can be separated into Na, a prefix which means not, and Sandra, meaning protector of humanity. Instead of waiting for the invaders to assault Drangleic, Vendrick decided to invade their land preemptively. The expedition he led was also intended to confirm Nashandra's words of the existence of that elusive army of giants. After all, the king could detect a nefarious intent under her holy exterior, but to his surprise, he found it. Gilia, the exiled hexer that desires to enact revenge upon Heidi, and rule it as a true Dark Lord, an archetypal Antichrist, had spent hundreds of years sculpting a legion of powerful barbarian golems, with the remains of dragons he'd found in his exile. That is, a treasure of titanite slabs, which were present on an island, as the world before the Dragon War was Pangea-like, and was only shattered as a result of the war, through the dark and chaotic arts, both of which scale with faith and intelligence. He plans to assault and ravage the mainland with his giants, meaning Nashandra's prophecy was a half-truth, and she posited that Vendrick should vanquish this Dark Lord, which would, symbolically, turn him into a Lord of Light as the opposite of that adversary, a title Gwyn held in the distant past. What Vendrick didn't know is that Gilia was no more. The giants had refused to be enslaved by him, and rebelled against their wicked master. The giant who killed Gilia had become their king, and he only wished for his people to live in peace, secluded from the world in their little island. Now assuming Nashandra's prophecy to be the whole truth, Vendrick massacres the giants. who were taken by surprise and didn't intend to fight a war. Upon his victorious return to Drangleic, he brought with him a score of their bodies. He'd keep half of them for himself, which he'd turn into golems, that is, mindless slave workers, and gives the other half to Aldia, so that he could use them in his experiments. An era of unprecedented peace and prosperity would befall Drangleic, an age of fire with a magnificent sun gleaming above. This was the culmination of ages of the curse being unchallenged by firelinking. All of the contenders for the throne of Ash had failed to corruption, and the souls of the New World served as fuel to the sun, the celestial demiurge. The three monarchs of yore had ignored their duty, and Vendrick could follow in their footsteps. His journey mirrored Gwyn's. He was, initially, a fair and brave warrior who respected valor above all, a man who fought against a powerful enemy for the sake of his people, a great unifier who created an all-encompassing empire. But with success and power came corruption, and he became a shadow of his former self. The Lord of Light would become a Dark Lord, the once revolutionary who'd call upon stagnation and decay. Through the power of the giants, that is, with his newly built Titanite golems, which were inspired by those he saw in Ilium Lois, Vendrick could extensively reform and expand the castle he and Nashandra, who had become his queen, occupied, a gesture made with the intent of impressing Nashandra. Through careful examination, it is possible to see precisely what is and isn't new. The parts of the castle built by Vendrick during this period of material abundance were made with black stone and are significantly more ornate than the rest of the structure. The extravagant monuments of pure gold he'd sculpted for the castle are indicative of the greed he was festering within him. The stationary golems he would place throughout the castle, which only activate through soul absorption, are also emblematic of his excesses. Chancellor Welliger doesn't even recognize the reformed castle when he becomes amnesiac. Tremendous was the scope of the reforms. He says, quote, "What has happened to our castle?" Many statues of legendary figures of the New World were sculpted to adorn the halls and rooftops of the castle. Romanticized depictions of the relentless warriors from the fallen kingdom of Hugo, the ancient warrior golems of Heide, the belfry gargoyles of Van. It was a display of Drangleic's inheritance, and of its domain over the entirety of the continent's territory. Vendrick could also commission a portrait of Nashandra, and the painter, who was a master of his craft, would create an image so accurate as to capture the queen's soul within it. As a result, the painting would curse those who looked at it, extracting their souls, like Nashandra was absorbing Vendrick's, turning him from a bright sovereign into a dark husk. As the king basked in his newfound wealth and power alongside his queen, his noble ambition faded from his mind. The warrior king had grown accustomed to a life of debauchery. The castle, which had once stood as a beacon of firelinking, was subverted into an embodiment of hedonism. And suddenly, the giants attacked. Nashandra's prophecy was self-fulfilled. Cyan, one of Vendrick's strongest knights, a man who bested the king's corridor, would form a front line and rush to face the giants at the shores, but he'd die a martyr's death. In Cyan's honor, the king would forge copies of his armor and gives them to a new order of knights which he'd name after him. The Titanite Vendrick had obtained from the giants he'd slain was ever abundant, and he'd fortify his troops with a nearly unlimited supply of powerful and ornate equipment. In contrast to Drangleic's forces, the giants wielded simple clubs and axes made from stone and conjured primitive pyromancies with their dark-imbued left hands, sourced from their innards. But the king's armies would be demolished by the invaders, for they fought with inhuman ferocity and hate, unlike what they had shown themselves to be capable of doing when they were being exterminated by the unprompted war that preceded their attack. Before, they were docile, they had no reason to fight. Now, they were motivated by revenge, and like undead who rose back from death, they were hollowed. They were so different, both physically, as their faces were sucked in by an empty hole, and in the way they fought. The knights and soldiers who'd battled them in the past could barely recognize them, questioning if they were even the same beings. The king would do everything within his means to house the invasion. He would reanimate the Iron King's ironclad soldiers and send them to the front lines, and order his brother to produce a creature capable of countering the strength of the giants. And so were the Primal Knights born. He'd create an entire army of soldier statues out of Titanite, which his task Velstad's, the royal aegis, with commanding. He'd also hire all Drangleic's operating mercenaries, including Volgan's falconers and the remnants of Old Feroza. Vendrick himself would fight alongside his warriors, despite his newfound appeal for the material. He was desperate to protect the earthly paradise he had built. As previously explained, these giants were like men, and were likewise affected by the curse. The word the Japanese text uses for the giants consists of both giant and human. As the giants fought against Vendrick's men on their island, they absorbed the cursed sparks of flame and became undead. As a result, they rose again with only one memory left in their souls, their feelings of hatred and desire for retribution. Nashandra had used them as scapegoats, as a way of holding both man and giant hostage to a perpetual war that could only result in their souls being absorbed by the sun, which, in turn, would strengthen the abyss. The giants employing their dark left hands as catalysts for their spells is a reference to the occult concept of the left-handed path, but it doubles as a reference to the unjust persecution of the left-handed by ignorant men who interpreted the esoteric literally. The Lord of the Giants would be defeated by the brave men of Drangleic, and his body was taken to the depths of the Cardinal Tower, where he'd be left to wane and later become the last giant. Or perhaps he would be mysteriously defeated by a warrior from another time, who'd claim his soul and the giant's kingship for himself. Or perhaps both of those things happened. The war would last for generations. A man who'd fought against the giants would have his son sent to war, and his son would have a son who'd be sent to war. Both sides would fight in this seemingly unending conflict, until their souls faded to the point of nigh emptiness. The soldiers would become hollows, and the giants would turn into trees, like the original stone arch trees, made from titanite, turned into wooden trees. Drangleic soldiers had their necks broken from looking up at the giants, and they kept fighting even when their enemies couldn't move anymore. The only thing driving their simple, empty minds was revenge. Realizing his foolish mistake, and the inevitability of the doom he had brought upon his empire, Vendrick would disappear from the world, and in the microcosm which reflects the macrocosm, his soul, which was once the most powerful to have ever resided within a man, had been reduced to an ember, drained by Nashandra's curse, that is, by the curse of undead. Even if he'd wanted to link the fire, he'd only turn into unkindled ash, as his once gleaming soul was now barren, as was his ambition. The once selfless, powerful revolutionary was now a crestfallen old man. As he was about to leave his post, his right and left-handed man would clash with each other, for one would choose to remain by the king's side to the bitter end, remaining loyal to the man himself, and the other would choose to remain loyal to the noble ideals which the man had abided by in the past. Velstadt would best Remy in a duel. The victor would accompany his king to his final resting place, to stand as his guard, and the loser would plan for revenge against Nashandra, who he knew was behind Drangleic's downfall. Before Vendrick vanished, he left behind many obstacles along the roads to link the fire, to stop the bearers of the curse. He'd ordered the construction of the gates of the king, which would only open with a magical key, the king's ring, and then tasked his loyal company of the Cyan Knights to guard over them, as well as to guard over chests which contained sublime bone dust. Cyan's name is a clever pun with cyanide, for he became known for his suicidal charge, and the order of knights named after him, the Cyan Knights, subverted the will of the man it was named after by gatekeeping the remains of martyrs the bearers of the curse seek. Vendrick had also tasked the Dragon Riders to serve as obstacles to that journey as well, some of whom would be positioned in key locations, like the one who guards the exit of the Tower of Flame, and who ordered his fire drakes to gatekeep the bridge to the Church of Blue as to forbid undead from joining the Blue Sentinels to help their fellow journeymen. And finally, the king had sealed his own brother, who he knew would conspire against his queen's wishes, within his manse. Vendrick could go hollow in the crypt of undead, walking in circles for eternity, surrounded by statues of Nito, an omen of death and decay, a man who aided Gwyn in spreading the curse. Like Vendrick, a fitting fate for the greedy king who abandoned martyrdom for his foolish dream of an eternal empire. By defeating the Hollow King, the bearer of the curse is finally freeing him from his limbo, and redeeming his soul by inheriting his original will of linking the fire, an act which mirrors the battle between a hallowed Gwyn and the chosen undead, who inherited Gwyn's original will of empowering mankind by aiding in the curse's dispelling.
Seeker of fire, conqueror of dark. I too sought fire once. With fire, they say, a true king can harness the curse. A lie, but I knew no better. Seeker of fire, you know not the depth of dark within you. It grows deeper still, the more flame you covet. Flame, oh, flame.
When Vendrick talks to the bearer of the curse, he cites a couple verses of an old tale. The tale that is narrated by an old woman before the first game starts, confirming the narrator to have been an in-universe character. Aldia created 3 more beings with remains of giants, though each being was a unique individual and not a new species of chimera. Sweet Shalquar was a talking cat who had inherited the dragon's wisdom. She displays a crown-looking pattern on the fur of her head, symbolizing her elucidation and artificial ancestry to the ancient rulers of nature. Her blue eyes are a reference to the moon, which powers the dragons with its moonlight during the Age of Ancients. She resides near the mansion Aldia had built in Majula, which, in the past, he occasionally occupies during his travels. She was tasked by Aldia to serve as a guide to the undead who'd make their liminal home in Majula, which is why she imparts knowledge to the bearer of the curse about the 4 great beings we must hunt to fulfill our Firelinking journey. And as expected for a Velka-adjacent character, she exposes, in a cynical tone, failed monarchs for their sins, and, just like in the first game, the protagonist is instructed to hunt the sinners down, which are reincarnations of the ones from the previous game, claim their souls and use them as fuel to link the fire in a ritual of self-sacrifice. Shanalot, whose name derives from Shana, which is the short for Shannon, and means wise, ancient, and river, and Charlotte, which means free woman, was a half-dragon, half-woman being who existed outside of the corporeal realm. She can teleport with the use of the Aged Feather, which is a symbol of freedom and derives from a bird, that is, a descendant of the dragons that inherits their wings. She was, however, paradoxically, ironically, confined to the Dragon Shrine, for Aldia's mansion was locked away by the King's Gate, and spiritually chained to the bonfires, for she was tasked with becoming the greatest firekeeper by Aldia. Thus, her epitaph, Emerald Herald, emerald being the fire-storing material from which the Estus flask is made, which is why she can graft shards onto the flask of the bearer of the curse. In alchemy, emerald is the material representative of the connection between the spiritual and the material, which is why the Emerald Tablet, which contains the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus, and whose content centers around the phrase as above, so below, is made out of it. And finally, Aldia managed to create his magnum opus, the Ancient Dragon, an almost perfect replica of his primal ancestors. It would rest at the Dragon Shrine's end, tasked with guarding the Ashen Mist Heart, an artifact that allows one to enter the soul's memories, which the dragon would only give to the undead who proved their worth by reaching its sanctuary, near the height of his journey. Aldia, whose name means time, phase, and maturing, referring to his role as a scholar who would both transcend the curse himself and aid others to do the same, for the whole of mankind, by linking the fire, went against the path his brother had chosen, and so prepared for the next generations of undead, who'd have to inherit his original will of becoming the King of Kings.
No one has come this far, not for a very long while. Your Honor, do you wish to share this curse? Then accept the fate of your ilk, and face the trials that await you. Unless you have already joined the quest for Young Hollow, there are but 2 paths. Inherit the order of this world, or destroy it. Outgrown Hollow, have you what it takes? Truly? Young Hollow, seek after Vendrick. He who almost became a true monarch.
Aldia studies the bonfire ascetics. They are, essentially, the hearts of giants, and when consumed by a bonfire, they spread their light into that particular stretch of time-space, advancing it and reinforcing the souls that live within it. Which is also what happens when the player begins a new game cycle, which, like nearly every single mechanic of Dark Souls, is canonically integrated into the game's narrative, as this series of videos will prove. That is the explanation for the dozens of dark spirits that roam Drangleic in New Game Plus. The world has been filled with more light, and so its connection to the spiritual realm has been amplified. The enemies and bosses are stronger for there bear more souls within them, thus the increased rewards. The greater soul memory of the bearer of the curse is what attracts Freya, the greedy spider, to him before he can even enter Tseldora. The same is true for invaders in general. The stronger one's soul memory, the stronger the invaders he attracts. After he'd finished his contributions to the journey of undead, Aldia would resume his experiments to uncover the key to transcending life itself. Inspired by an abyssal living suit of armor he'd faced in his travels, the Pursuer, Aldia would conduct a dark ritual similar to the incidents that had produced the Red Eye Orb of the Dark Raves, to create the Forlorn, a ghost that lacked a physical existence. The ghost would be sentenced to eternally haunt the lands, for he was no one, and knew only to kill men, perhaps in an attempt to obtain a body for himself to inhabit. Aldia's next experiment would be an inversion of the previous one. He'd attempt to transcend life by removing one's spirit from his body. He'd conduct a dark ritual that would exorcise the soul of a partner scholar, the court sorcerer of Drangleic, who'd been locked within the mansion alongside his master. The ritual resulted in the scholar being possessed by the abyssal spirit of Navlaan, an ancient hexer. Navlaan had pursued the secret art of reincarnation. For his heresy, collective punishment befell his entire clan. However, by the time of his execution, he had already managed to formulate the spell which would enable his resurrection. His body would die alongside his family, but his soul had escaped it moments before. He'd swear vengeance upon the world that had been so unfair to him and his people. The familial teams paired with a pursuit of a secret art of revival ties Navlaan to Pinwheel, the masked necromancer of Dark Souls 1. And the prefix of his name, Na, relates him to the reincarnations of Manus' fractured soul, such as Nashandra and Aldia. Recognizing the grave danger presented by Navlaan, should he freely make use of his newly acquired vessel, the court sorcerer, who still had a degree of control over his body, a predicament like that of Jekyll and Hyde from the classic work of literature, would lock himself away. In a reference to the questline of Mephistopheles, a character from Demon Souls, the scholar would ask of the undead who freed him to kill each person who had made contact with him in the past, fearing they'd be susceptible to possession by the dark soul of the hexer. Lastly, Aldia would make one final effort. He'd use himself as a subject of the next experiment. Through a ritual that involves the sacrifice of his corporeal self, he managed to free himself from his prison and transcend life. But his existence had to be linked to the bonfires, or he'd have faded away into nothingness. He would only be able to manifest in the material realm as a grotesque wooden head. He'd become akin to a failed Rebis. His voice was twisted into sounding like a combination of a man's and a woman's, and his bizarre wooden form is the result of having injected his body with the essence of the giants, in an attempt of empowering himself with the essence of the dragons. His condition mirrors that of the firekeepers who were linked to special bonfires and relied on them to exist, which is poetic considering his devotion to firelinking. Aldia is the inversion of the warrior king who falls prey to nihilism. He is a life-loving scholar who self-sacrifices in an attempt to reach an answer to the oppressive mysteries of the world. Raimi, Vendrick's right-hand knight, wanted to free Drangleic from Nashandra's accursed shackles. He traveled through the lands in search of her sisters, who he challenged in an attempt to prepare himself to face the queen. Aldia was one of the fragments of the abyss who desired for the powerful soul of a sovereign she could taint. However, she arrived late, for the Iron King had already corrupted himself. Having lost her purpose, she decided to settle within the Brume Tower, caring for its forlorn inhabitants like she was their mother. She'd raise them from their ashes and fill them with warmth. Raimi stormed the abandoned complex and fought against its guards, until he was faced with Aldia. Instead of smiting her, he's developed empathy towards the forsaken woman, for he'd see himself in her. He'd swear an oath to her, abdicating his desire for rebellion. As he now stood as her eternal guard, she granted him the power of Ash, and healed him whenever he was hurt. He'd become the Fume Knight who protected the mother of the Forlorn. Raimi's name derives from the Old English word Rayman, meaning outcry, in reference to his rebellion against his former king, as well as to the pyromancy of the same name, which is acquired from Adalia's soul. His epitaph, Fume Knight, is a clever translation of Smoke Knight, which is both literal and figurative, for he fumes with anger, as his soundtrack also suggests. His design subtly resembles a crow, the old shield he discarded being adorned with one, as well as his ring. His defense was much weaker in comparison to his old rivals, so he'd instead focus on his strengths, and take on a sword contaminated by ash, which belongs to the old Iron King's collection. Ironically, Raimi forsook his duty for a temptation similar to that which had taken his king. He became a hypocrite. Under Nadalia's rule, the Brume Tower was configured akin to the painted world of Ariamis, the abyssal priestess being like Velka, the nurturing mother of those who belong nowhere, or rather, her artificial daughter, Priscilla, the guardian of the painting. And Raimi parallels Jeremiah, her protector, who betrayed his queen due to her corruption. After his exile, during which he travels to enemy territory to defect, to Anor Londo, he devoted himself to Fume, the goddess of love. Drangleic was no more. The continent gradually sunk into the damp, dark abyss. The curse had taken its toll. The men would lose their souls to the dark side once again, and with them, their sense of self, their memories, a process that culminated in them forgetting their very births, which is what the introduction cinematic depicts happening. The bearer of the curse is like the newborn within the memory that is melting away. When that happened, they'd feel a mysterious pull towards Drangleic's decrepit gate. Despite existing only in the distant past, the land was replete with souls, and so, empty, dark-filled husks of men were attracted to it, like moths to a flame. Indeed, Drangleic was even manifesting into the dreams of their yearning minds. An old firekeeper would station herself in the middle of the road that led to the ruins of Drangleic. She'd serve as a guide to the undead who yearned. Her habit of spinning a thread is a reference to Klotos, the fate of Greek myth, who spun the thread of life and weaved destiny. Upon reaching the ruined gate, the undead would partake in a ritual. The blood moon, that is, an eclipse, would summon within a lake, whose reflection casted an image of the past, a whirlpool of darkness that served as a portal to the past, where Drangleic rested. Near the lake is a witch tree, swarmed by bright bugs. The wise tree is Quella, the god of dreams, who is Gwyndolin, and the bugs are metaphors for the undead, who are guided by him. Gwyndolin, who is also god of the dark moon and of the dark sun, the union of opposites, is the one who calls upon the eclipse. Quella means to quell, as Gwyndolin will quell the yearning of the accursed undead by freeing them from the dark side, and in the microcosm, by opening the way to Drangleic. The undead would wake up on an altar at the Things Betwixt, a highly symbolic location where they'd begin their journey. It hosts an unending stretch of stone pillars, a reference to the Ash Lake, one with a particularly significant meaning. In ancient times, before the coming of life, the arch trees were made of stone, but as fire appeared, all stone was gradually twisted into wood for its interaction with it. The petrified trees of the Things Betwixt are omens of the cycles of nature, for the place symbolizes firelinking, the conspiracy to restore the world's balance. And conversely, the undead of Drangleic turned green, unlike their predecessors, because of their alchemical composition. Those who came from the dark, the pygmies, man's primordial ancestors, were born when the light cast by the first flame penetrated the soil. Their bodies were stone-like, because like every living being, they were made of titanite, which is merely the state of matter when it is imbued with souls. As previously explained, ages went by and the first flame was left unkindled, for those who were set to link the fire fell to the temptation of the dark. That caused the curse of undead to become stronger than ever, which is why the bearer of the curse loses their health with each death, a penalty much stronger than that experienced by the chosen undead, who merely lost his human form, disconnecting himself from other worlds. In summary, the bearer of the curse has a body made of wood, which rots upon death, and as the new world is distant from Lordran, the world's epicenter, the dark sign manifests on their backs, for their backs face Gwyn's sun. Their decaying skin exposes their spines and ribs, forming a pattern that resembles a falling leaf. Similarly to the bearer of the curse, the ancient dragon, Aldia's nigh-perfect replica, has a brown, wooden body covered by vines, unlike the stone bodies of the true ancient dragons. This is also the reason why the durability mechanic works differently in Dark Souls 2. Drangleic is buried deep in the abyss, and each weapon is a soul, a memory, which is why their special attacks consume a lot of their durability, It is like when a caster casts a spell, and spells work through one's mind stat, and loses one of its uses. It stands to reason that the souls present in Drangleic were not as bright as those in Lordran, which means that its weapons aren't as durable. Everything is darker in Drangleic, thus the reason for the torch mechanic. The journeying undead would reach a hut, where 3 more firekeepers lived. There, they'd be gifted a human effigy, a wooden handicrafts manufactured by the firekeepers themselves, which would restore their humanity, in turn triggering them to remember who they are. This is what happens during the character creation. The undead is rebuilding his image of himself. Then, the Red Witches warn him of the perils he'll face in his path, that he will die over and over again. The firekeepers are quite cynical and pessimistic, for they had seen countless travelers like him lose themselves. But ultimately, they still fulfill their duties, and tell the visitor to go on, and should he lose himself again, he'd be welcome to come back to receive their aid. The hut's design is highly symbolic. It is like the cave within the primordial arch tree, where the pygmies were born, the fireplace representing the first flame. The northern wall of the Thing's Betwixt bears a crack in the shape of a humanity, from which a white, dim light shines through. And this is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. If you want to support my work and get access to a Substack-like blog in which I post in-depth analysis of works of an esoteric nature, ranging from movies to manga to music clips, as well as my insights on philosophy and religion, you can check out my Patreon.